Hi.
Hi. Alyssa's here. James is here. Jenny's here. LeBron is here.
Hey, Miss McCall.
Hey.
Hey, I'm not gonna lie. Miss Petty made my day.
What'd you do?
She just helped me. She gave me a song to listen to called "Big Butt of Jesus," and I started laughing.
Oh boy. That sounds interesting.
Also, the Gray Book showing.
Also what?
Your Gray Book is showing behind you.
Oh my gosh. Sorry. Thanks. That's a pain. Not what we want. I mean, I guess you didn't actually see anything because it was on attendance, but don't want to make that mistake. How do they look, Isaiah? Good. Nice. Okay, so an interesting thing happened, which is that I messed up my own plans. I kind of forgot that I had you guys do on Monday, what was the e-learning day, what I had planned to do for today. So what we're going to do today is just finish reading the chapter we were reading yesterday. And once we're done with that, we'll just be done. Let me just check this real quick. Okay, no worries, no worries. I've been getting a million emails about graduation today, so just need to check. Can I look? Hang on one second. I helped design the actual announcement, but not the thank you cards or the name card, so that's cool. Okay, thank you. So we left off yesterday, and I'll share my screen with you guys in just a sec, but we left off at we finished page 111, sorry. Which was where, I mean, yesterday we learned all about Gatsby's past and how his name was really James Gatz, and he kind of invented all this stuff about his life. We don't really know what's real and what's not, but it's pretty sure that the version of stuff that Nick tells is true, because he learned it sort of after the main events of this story. But Tom and Gatsby were in the same company, like hanging out with some people, and Tom is definitely hostile towards him, and Gatsby's like, I know your wife, and he's makes him a little suspicious for sure. So where we left off, Nick kind of introduced the fact that they're all going to go to one of Gatsby's parties. Tom, Daisy, Nick, probably Jordan, and obviously Gatsby will be there, and it's really the first time they've all been together. And if you can sort of imagine, if you're like having an affair with someone and had to go to a party with them and their spouse, things might get a little awkward. And there's some stuff coming up that Gatsby says that I think is just really indicative of the kind of person that he is, particularly at the end of this chapter. And we should get to it. It's not, I think we have like 3 full pages left of this chapter. And I want to talk about it a little bit after. So it was just saying, the party was all the same, blah, 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 but I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Would anybody like to read today? Not feeling it? I'll do it. Happy to. We are on page 112. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a world complete in itself, with its own standards and its own great figure, second to nothing, because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again through Daisy's eyes. It is invariably saddening to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expended your own powers of adjustment. They arrived at twilight, and as we strolled out among the sparkling hundreds, Daisy's voice was playing murmurous tricks in her throat. These things excite me so, she whispered. If you want to kiss me anytime during the evening, Nick, let me know and I'll be glad to arrange it for you. Just mention my name or present a green card. I'm giving out green. Look around, suggested Gatsby. I'm looking around. I'm having a marvelous, you must see the faces of many people you've heard about. Tom's arrogant eyes roamed the crowd. We don't go around very much, he said. In fact, I was just thinking I don't know a soul here. Perhaps you know that lady. Gatsby indicated a gorgeous, scarcely human orchid of a woman who sat in state under a white plum tree. Tom and Daisy stared. Is that Randall coming in? Yeah. Tom and Daisy stared with that particularly unreal feeling that accompanies the recognition of a hitherto ghostly celebrity of the movies. She's lovely, said Daisy. The man bending over her is her director. He took them ceremoniously from group to group. So like they get there and Gatsby is like really wanting to show off everything. He's like, did you notice this? Did you notice that? Stop talking and like look around at all the fantastic things I have and like look at all these important people who are here. And he's like really wanting to be impressive. And Tom's just kind of like, I don't know anybody. I don't know celebrities. I don't keep up with that sort of thing. So they're not super impressed, or at least Tom is not. He took them ceremoniously from group to group. Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan. After an instant's hesitation, he added, the polo player. Oh no, objected Tom quickly, not me. But evidently the sound of it pleased Gatsby, for Tom remained the polo player for the rest of the evening. I've never met so many celebrities, Daisy exclaimed. I liked that man. What was his name with the sort of blue nose? Gatsby identified him, adding that he was a small producer. Well, I liked him anyhow. Oh, hey. Yes. I know, I don't know what all she got. She's got a differently shaped box than anyone else. I'd a little rather, it's a weird way of phrasing that. I'd a little rather not be the polo player, said Tom pleasantly. I'd rather look at all these famous people in oblivion. Daisy and Gatsby danced. I remember being surprised by his graceful, conservative foxtrot. I'd never seen him dance before. Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request I remained watchfully in the garden. In case there's a fire or a flood, she explained, or any act of God. Tom appeared from his oblivion as we were sitting down to supper together. Do you mind if I eat with some people over here? He said. A fellow's getting off some funny stuff. Go ahead, answered Daisy genially. And if you want to take down any addresses, here's my little gold pencil. She looked around after a moment and told me the girl was common but pretty, and I knew that except for the half hour she'd been alone with Gatsby, she wasn't having a good time. So Tom's kind of like going off to hit on other women like during this party where he's at with his wife. And like, granted, she's kind of there with her sort of boyfriend, Gatsby, but he doesn't know whether there's anything going on with him. He's just like suspicious of Gatsby for all kinds of reasons, for the reasons everybody's suspicious of Gatsby. But Daisy's kind of like, go off with whatever woman you want, take down some numbers and addresses if you want, I don't care. But she's not having a very good time. We were at a particularly tipsy table. That was my fault. Gatsby had been called to the phone, and I'd enjoyed these same people only 2 weeks before. But what had amused me then turned septic on the air now. How do you feel, Mrs. Bedecker? The girl addressed was trying, unsuccessfully, to slump against my shoulder. At this inquiry, she sat up and opened her eyes. What? A massive and lethargic woman who had been urging Daisy to play golf with her at the local club tomorrow spoke in Miss Bedecker's defense. Oh, she's all right now. When she's had 5 or 6 cocktails, she always starts screaming like that. I tell her she ought to leave it alone. I do leave it alone, affirmed the accused hollowly. We heard you yelling, so I said to Doc Civet here, there's somebody that needs your help, Doc. She's much obliged, I'm sure, said another friend without gratitude. But you got her dress all wet when you stuck her head in the pool. Anything I hate is to get my head stuck in a pool, mumbled Miss Bedecker. They almost drowned me once over in New Jersey. Then you ought to leave it alone, countered Dr. Civet. Civet, I don't know. Speak for yourself, cried Mrs. Bedecker violently. Your hand shakes. I wouldn't let you operate on me. It was like that. Almost the last thing I remember was standing with Daisy and watching the moving picture director and his star. They were still under the white plum tree and their faces were touching, except for a pale, thin ray of moonlight between them. It occurred to me that he had been very slowly bending toward her all evening to attain this proximity, and even while I watched, I saw him stoop one ultimate degree and kiss at her cheek. I like her, said Daisy. I think she's lovely. But the rest offended her, and inarguably because it wasn't a gesture, but an emotion. She was appalled by West Egg, this unprecedented place that Broadway had begotten upon a Long Island fishing village, appalled by its raw vigor that chafed under the old euphemisms and by the too obtrusive fate that herded its inhabitants along a shortcut from nothing to nothing. She saw something awful in the very simplicity she failed to understand. And you kind of have to remember that East Egg is where Daisy and Tom live, is like old money, kind of snobby, very like high fashion kind of place. And West Egg is new money, flashy, very lavish. Obviously, like that's where Gatsby lives, and his parties are so lavish. But she's not really impressed with any of it. She really doesn't like it, which, given everything he's done for her, he bought this house to be close to her. He throws these parties hoping she'll come in one day, and she's not even really enjoying it. It's not the best outcome. I sat on the front steps with them while they waited for their car. It was dark here in front. Only the bright door sent 10 square feet of light volleying out into the soft black morning. Sometimes a shadow moved against a dressing room blind above, gave way to another shadow, an indefinite procession of shadows, who rouged and powdered in an invisible glass. Who is this Gatsby, anyhow? Demanded Tom suddenly. Some big bootlegger? Where'd you hear that? I inquired. Anybody know what a bootlegger is?
The bootlegger
Yes,
or
people that
bootlicker?
peddle alcohol.
I heard
bootleg liquor.
one time.
They peddle alcohol during prohibition.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
They peddle
Canada.
alcohol during prohibition,
And
which is
then-
where,
Yeah,
ahead.
they can't sell it though. So they're like, you know how that what is it that you know that old French, like, it's not there anymore, but you know where Life of Folly is?
where what is?
Life of Folly, that Italian restaurant downtown.
Oh yeah.
Then you know that old it's not old, but you know that the what is it? The like French bakery that's near there?
Uh-huh.
That building used to be a bootlegging place.
Oh
And they
wow.
would have shows, so you would buy the ticket to the show, and then you could go get alcohol because they couldn't sell alcohol.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I
it's like
didn't
the
know
what
that.
Blind Tiger or something.
What? Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, I didn't know. Blind Tiger. Yeah, we used to go
Yeah.
there a bit when we were downtown.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was like a speakeasy.
yeah, that's what it was. Yeah,
Very cool. Yeah, like in the 1920s, there were all these prohibition was like all of these barriers on buying alcohol, which obviously like people are going to find ways around it, and speakeasies were one of the ways they did that. And bootleggers were people who peddled liquor because it couldn't be bought like in stores and stuff, and so they made a lot of money off of it. And now here's Tom saying, is he a bootlegger? Like, is that where he got his money from? And we don't really know where he got his money from. He's told a couple of different stories that don't really add up, and people were making a lot of money off of bootlegging then. So that's a possibility. Where'd you hear that? I inquired. I didn't hear it. I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, you know. Not Gatsby, I said shortly. He loves Gatsby. He was silent for a moment. The pebbles of the drive crunched under his feet. Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together. A breeze stirred the gray haze of Daisy's fur collar. At least they're more interesting than the people we know, she said with an effort. You didn't look so interested. Well, I was. Tom laughed and turned to me. Did you notice Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under a cold shower? Daisy began to sing with the music in a husky, rhythmic whisper, bringing out a meaning in each word that it had never had before and would never have again. When the melody rose, her voice broke up sweetly, following it in a way contralto voices have, and each change tipped out a little of her warm human magic upon the air. Lots of people come who haven't been invited, she said suddenly. That girl hadn't been invited. They simply forced their way in, and he's too polite to object. I'd like to know who he is and what he does, insisted Tom. And I think I'll make a point of finding out. I can tell you right now, she answered. He owned some drugstores, a lot of drugstores. He built them up himself. And that is one thing he mentioned. He said that he was in the drug trade for a while and one other thing for a while, oil maybe. And he said he's not in either of them anymore. So at least he's like told a similar story. The dilatory limousine came rolling up the drive. Good night, Nick, said Daisy. Her glance left me and sought the lighted top of the steps where 3 o'clock in the morning, a neat, sad little waltz of that year, was drifting out the open door. After all, in the very casualness of Gatsby's party, there were romantic possibilities totally absent from her world. What was it up there in the song that seemed to be calling her back inside? What would happen now in the dim, incalculable hours? Perhaps some unbelievable guest would arrive, a person infinitely rare and to be marveled at, some authentically radiant young girl who with one fresh glance at Gatsby, one moment of magical encounter would blot out these 5 years of unwavering devotion. Which it kind of makes me wonder, like, did Gatsby even like try to meet any other women, or was he just like, it's Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. There's no one else for me. She's the only one. And I think that's the answer. Like, he's got all of these rich, famous, beautiful women coming to his house. Hey, let's wake up. Pay attention. He's got all these wonderful, beautiful women coming to his house, and he doesn't even look at them. He's so focused on Daisy. I stayed late that night. Gatsby asked me to wait until he was free, and I lingered in the garden until the inevitable swimming party had run up, chilled and exalted, from the black beach, until the lights were extinguished in the guest rooms overhead. When he came down the steps at last, the tan skin was drawn unusually tight on his face, and his eyes were bright and tired. She didn't like it, he said immediately. Of course she did. She didn't like it, he insisted. She didn't have a good time. He was silent, and I guessed at his unutterable depression. I feel far away from her, he said. It's hard to make her understand. You mean about the dance? The dance? He dismissed all the dances he had given with a snap of his fingers. Old sport, the dance is unimportant. He wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, I never loved you. After she had obliterated 3 years with that sentence, they could decide upon the more practical measures to be taken. One of them was that after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville and be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. And she doesn't understand, he said. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours. He broke off and began to walk up and down a desolate path of fruit rinds and discarded favors and crushed flowers. I wouldn't ask too much of her, I ventured. You can't repeat the past. Can't repeat the past, he cried incredulously. Why, of course you can. We're going to talk about that after we finish this chapter. He looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of his house, just out of reach of his hand. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before, he said, nodding determinedly. She'll see. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then, but if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. One autumn night, 5 years before, they had been walking down the street when the leaves were falling, and they came to a place where there were no trees and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. They stopped here and turned toward each other. Now it was a cool night with that mysterious excitement in it which comes at the 2 changes of the year. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalk really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it if he climbed alone, and once there, he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. Kind of gross. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Through it all, he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than the wisp of startled air. But they made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever. These last couple of pages are wild because I think we get a really good glance into what Gatsby is actually thinking about this whole thing with Daisy. And what does it say he wants? What does Gatsby want to happen? Yeah. He wants her back. And even more than that, he doesn't want her to just say, okay, I'll leave Tom and be with you. He wants her to say she never loved Tom and that basically he's the only person she's ever loved. And what he's really hoping for is to kind of wipe out the last 5 years as if they never happened. But the issue with that, of course, is that they did. And people change a lot in 5 years. And he's hoping to really recapture what they had. And I think there's a couple of really good lines on this page, 118. He says towards the bottom, he talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself perhaps that had gone into loving Daisy. And I think that's really insightful on Nick's part, because it's kind of like, you know, when you think about a time in your life that was really awesome and you're like, if I could just go back there and like live where I lived, go to the school I went to, be friends with the people that I was friends with then, everything would be awesome. But even if you did all those things, it wouldn't be the same because that time's behind you and you're a different person now. And it's like Gatsby just doesn't really realize that. He is thinking that if he can get Daisy to admit that she never loved Tom, then the last 5 years will not even matter. And we know that Gatsby is very like imaginative and romantic and idealistic and ambitious. And we heard all of that when Nick was telling sort of his story earlier in this chapter, and about how he kind of had this vision of like the kind of person he wanted to be, and then he just became that. He changed his name and he became that person. And so he kind of, it's almost like he thinks he can will things into happening and doesn't account for the fact that other people have feelings in the matter or can make decisions of their own. So he is sort of thinking that if he can make this happen, then his life will be perfect and everything he's worked for will have been worth it. And it talks about how when he first knew Daisy, he put so much emphasis on being with her that he was like, okay, if I kiss her, my life is going to be changed from here on out. And this girl is what I'm going to be about from here on out. And he does. And it's like a light switch goes off. And that's the only thing he wants to focus on, even after he's gone off to war, even after she's gotten married and had a kid. We hear very little about the kid, but you know, it's 1922. A mother is probably not going to just like divorce her husband and leave her child. It's unlikely. Divorce was a lot more common then than it was in like Ethan Frome time, but there weren't that many options for women is the thing. Like Daisy has been a rich debutante her whole life. She doesn't have like marketable skills. And World War I is really the time, it's the first time women are going into the workforce. So there are just not that many options for women. And she's got a good setup, except for the fact that her husband is awful and racist and sexist and abusive. She's got a good house, a lot of money, stuff she likes, a kid she likes, presumably. It would be hard to just like give that up for something that might not work out with this guy that you had feelings for 5 years ago. And I'm not saying that, you know, she didn't have, that she wasn't in love with Gatsby. I think she probably was. I mean, she freaked out before her wedding and like almost didn't marry Tom. But, you know, she's not gonna just wipe out the last 5 years. That's asking a lot of her. And I think this is kind of the part that sort of sums up who Gatsby is as a person. Nick's kind of trying to be reasonable and saying, you know, you're asking a lot of her to say that she doesn't love her husband, to leave him, to act like none of this ever happened. You can't repeat the past. And Gatsby says, of course you can. And I think that that just really sums up who he is as a person, because he has so idealized not only who Daisy is and what their relationship was like, but kind of who he was at the time. I mean, instead he's trying to recover some idea of himself that had gone into loving Gatsby, or gone into loving Daisy. He's trying to be exactly who he was 5 years ago. He wants the world to be exactly like it was 5 years ago, which, to be fair, we talked about this before we started reading Gatsby, that like this is post World War I. And this is a time where everybody's kind of like questioning what their purpose in life is. And after a thing like a war, where do you even go from there, you know? And Nick is Gatsby's no exception to that. He's thinking about like, when was the last time life made sense? And before the war with Daisy, let's try to get back to that. But he's just kind of ignoring the fact, or being really unrealistic about the fact that a lot changes in 5 years. She's changed in 5 years. You've presumably changed in 5 years. Her situation's changed. You're never going to be able to recover exactly what it was like before. So let's be more realistic about it. But realism is not Gatsby's thing. Okay, so we are done with that. If you'll recall, I told you chapter 7 is the longest chapter, and it is. But we'll start it on Tuesday. Monday, we're going to be doing some other stuff, this music infusion lesson with Daisy, or about Daisy, which should be good. But that's all today. I'm gonna just let you guys have the rest of the day to yourself, or the rest of the period anyway. And I hope you'll have a nice weekend. Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.